My son died 4 years ago. Every year I send his wife $100,000 to take care of my granddaughter. One day, my granddaughter grabbed my sleeve and whispered, "Grandpa, please don't send money to my mother anymore." What I discovered afterward horrified me. Her name is Courtney Parker. She is the woman I trusted with everything after my son was gone. For 4 straight years, I believed she was doing her best, raising my granddaughter alone in our quiet suburb outside Grand Rapids. I never asked for receipts. I never checked how the money was spent. I just wired $100,000 to her account every January like clockwork because that is what family does. I am Donald Parker, 68 years old. I run a small neighborhood grocery store that has been in my family for decades. The store kept me going when the rest of my world fell apart. I thought sending that money was the only way I could still protect what was left. That quiet afternoon at the park started like any other. We were sitting on our usual bench when my granddaughter suddenly reached over and gripped my sleeve hard. Her little hand was trembling. She looked up at me, eyes wide with real fear, and whispered words that stopped my heart cold. "Grandpa, please don't send money to my mother anymore." She glanced over her shoulder, then leaned in even closer. "There is something you need to see." Before I tell you what happened next, if this story already has your attention, hit that like button right now. Drop a comment and let me know exactly where you are watching from. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want to hear the full truth of what I uncovered, make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss a single part of what comes next. The short drive back from the park left me with too much silence and too many questions I could no longer push aside. For 4 years, I had moved through my days in the suburbs outside Grand Rapids telling myself the worst was behind us. Now Brianna's frightened whisper kept echoing louder than the hum of the tires on the road. Life after Nicholas's accident had settled into a narrow routine centered around the store. Parker Family Market occupies the corner lot where Maple meets Chestnut, the same building my father opened decades ago. Every morning at 6, I unlock the glass door, flip the sign, and start stocking the shelves with fresh bread milk cartons and rows of canned vegetables, while the oak coffee pot begins its slow morning drip. The fluorescent lights buzz overhead as I wipe down the counter and arrange the newspaper stand near the entrance. Regular customers know me by name. Mrs. Henderson stops in every Tuesday for her favorite herbal tea and a loaf of sourdough. Mr. Wallace arrives promptly at 8:15 for his newspaper and scratch-off lottery tickets, always complaining about the price of gas but never forgetting to ask how I am holding up. There's more conversations about the weather, the local high school football scores, or the latest road construction. Give me something ordinary to hold on to when the evenings stretch long and empty. My wife had passed 2 years before Nicholas, her heart simply giving out one quiet morning while she stood at the kitchen sink rinsing coffee mugs. The doctors listed cardiac arrest on the certificate, but I understood the deeper truth. The grief over our only son had worn her down until she could no longer carry it. After Nicholas's funeral, I found myself running the store alone, opening before sunrise and closing well after dark, just to avoid walking into rooms that still carried faint traces of both of them. The cash register drawer still sticks on the left side the way it has for 20 years. The wooden floorboards creak in the same spots near the cereal aisle. These familiar details became my anchor. Each January, without exception, I sat at the small wooden desk in the back office, logged into the bank website, and wired $100,000 directly into Courtney's account. The transfer always went through smoothly, the screen showing the confirmation number in bold green letters. In the first year, I typed a short personal note, wishing her strength and telling her Brianna deserved every opportunity. By the second and third years, the notes grew shorter until they disappeared completely. Her replies arrived as brief text messages within a day or two, simple acknowledgments like, got it or thanks for the support. She never attached photos of Brianna at school. Events, never mentioned report cards or dentist visits, never suggested I stop by for a weekend meal or a quick visit to the house. I told myself she was still adjusting to life as a single mother and that pushing for more information might make me seem distrustful or controlling. So I kept sending the money and convinced myself it was reaching my granddaughter in the ways that mattered most. The store kept me occupied during daylight hours, but the evenings felt heavier with each passing month. After locking the front door, I would drive the same road past the elementary school where Brianna now attended first grade and the community park where we sometimes shared ice cream. The house waited dark and silent at the end of the street. Inside the living room, furniture remained exactly as we bought it when Nicholas was still in high school. I kept the television volume low, prepared simple dinners at the kitchen counter, and tried not to count how many nights passed without any update from Courtney about how Brianna was progressing in school or what activities she enjoyed after classes. Brianna had grown from a toddler into a 7-year-old without me witnessing most of the small milestones that mattered to a grandfather. I only received the pieces Courtney chose to share during our infrequent short phone conversations every couple of months. She would mention a new pair of shoes or an upcoming parent-teacher conference, but the details stayed surface level and brief. I never pressed harder because I feared it would come across as doubt. Instead, I continued writing those large January transfers and reminded myself this arrangement honored my son's memory by ensuring his daughter never lacked basic stability or security. That particular evening, after leaving the park, I turned onto my street as the street lights began flickering on one by one along the quiet blocks. The neighborhood looked peaceful with porch swings moving gently in the early evening breeze and children's bicycles left scattered on front lawns. I eased the car into the driveway, turned off the engine, and sat listening to the soft ticking of the cooling motor for a long minute. The weight of Brianna's words pressed against my chest with a clarity that refused to fade. I finally opened the car door and stepped into the cool Michigan air. The familiar scent of cut grass and distant charcoal grills drifting across neighboring yards. Walking up the 3 concrete steps, I unlocked the front door and entered the quiet house where the only sound greeting me was the soft click of the lock turning behind me. Days after that conversation in the park, I began watching Courtney from a distance whenever I could slip away from the store. I told myself it was only to make sure Brianna was safe, but the unease had already taken root and refused to leave. I started by driving past their house on Maple Street during my lunch break or after closing the market. The 2-story home with white siding and black shutters looked ordinary from the curb, the lawn slightly overgrown as usual. I never stopped or knocked on the door. Instead, I parked a block away behind a row of parked cars and waited with the engine off. Most afternoons, Courtney left around 3:30 to pick up Brianna from school. She drove the same silver sedan she had owned for the past 2 years, always backing out carefully before turning toward the elementary building. One Tuesday, I saw her pull into the parking lot of a small strip mall on the east side of town. She stepped out wearing a dark jacket and jeans, hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. A tall man with short brown hair and a leather jacket waited near the entrance of a coffee shop. They greeted each other with an easy familiarity that made my stomach tighten. He touched her arm as they walked inside together and stayed for nearly 40 minutes. When they emerged, he walked her back to the car, leaned in close while speaking, then watched her drive away before getting into his own vehicle. I noted the license plate on a scrap of paper and told myself it could be nothing more than a casual acquaintance. The same pattern repeated 3 more times that week. Different locations, once at a grocery store parking lot, once near the community center, once at a gas station on the edge of town. But the man remained the same, Justin Hayes. I learned his name later when I ran the plate through a basic online search. Each meeting lasted between 30 and 50 minutes. They never held hands in public, but their body language suggested far more than friendship. Courtney smiled in a way I had never seen during our brief exchanges about Brianna. At the same time, I noticed changes in my granddaughter. Every other Saturday, when I took her for our usual park visit, she seemed quieter than before. On the way back to her house, she would grow visibly tense as we approached the neighborhood. Her small shoulders hunched forward and she gripped the seatbelt tighter. When we pulled into the driveway, she hesitated before opening the car door, glancing toward the front windows as if expecting something unpleasant. One afternoon, she asked in a small voice if she could stay longer at my place instead of going home right away. When I gently reminded her that her mother was waiting, she simply nodded and went inside without saying goodbye. The more I observed, the heavier the discomfort became. I found myself checking the clock at the store more often, calculating how long it would take to reach their street during a slow afternoon. Sleep grew restless. I lay awake replaying every short text Courtney had ever sent and every vague answer she gave when I asked about Brianna's school life or health. The large transfers I had made for 4 years now felt like money disappearing into a black hole with no visible benefit to my granddaughter. I began keeping a simple notebook in the glove compartment, recording dates, times, and locations of Courtney's meetings with Justin Hayes. The entries grew longer each week. One Thursday evening, I sat in my car 2 blocks from their house and watched Courtney arrive home later than usual. Justin's vehicle followed a few minutes behind. He did not get out, but they spoke through the open window for nearly 10 minutes before he drove off. Brianna stood on the porch, waiting, arms wrapped around herself, even though the evening was mild. By the end of that month, the unease had turned into a constant knot in my chest. I caught myself staring at the family photos on my mantle, wondering how much of the last 4 years had been built on assumptions I no longer trusted. The store continued its daily rhythm, customers coming and going, but my mind stayed fixed on the silver sedan, the man named Justin Hayes, and the frightened look in Brianna's eyes every time we approached her front door. I finally turned the key in the ignition and drove away from the curb. That night, the notebook page for that day now filled with another entry I wished I did not have to write. Weeks of quiet observation finally pushed me past the point of waiting. One evening after closing the market, I drove straight home, went upstairs to the bedroom closet, and took down the brass urn that had sat on the mantel for 4 years. I carried it to the kitchen table under the bright overhead light and stared at it for a long moment. The urn felt heavier than I remembered, its surface cool and smooth against my palms. I had never opened it before. After the funeral, I told myself I could not bear to disturb what remained of Nicholas. Now the questions Brianna had planted refused to stay silent. My hands shook slightly as I gripped the threaded lid and twisted. It came loose more easily than expected, as if it had been opened at least once before. Inside lay a clear plastic bag, tied at the top with a simple twist tie. Through the plastic, I could see a dark, coarse powder. I untied the bag and poured a small amount onto a sheet of white paper. The grains were uneven, some almost black, others lighter brown. I rubbed a pinch between my fingers. The texture felt wrong, too rough, too dry, nothing like the fine ash I had imagined from cremated remains. Then the smell hit me. Rich, dark, unmistakable. Coffee, not faint or old, but fresh ground coffee mixed with something sweeter and spicier underneath. I brought the paper closer and inhaled again. Cinnamon. The same warm, reddish brown flecks I sold every day at the store in the baking aisle. My stomach turned. I dumped the rest of the bag onto the table. A small mound of coffee grounds spilled out, flecked throughout with ground cinnamon. No bone fragments, no gray ash, nothing that could possibly belong to a human body. I sat there staring at the pile, my mind racing through every detail of the past 4 years. The police report, the closed casket, the moment Courtney handed me the urn at the funeral home. All of it replayed in sharp flashes. I had wired hundreds of thousands of dollars, believing I was supporting my granddaughter while she grieved her father. I had accepted every short text from Courtney without question. I had let myself believe the accident had taken my son and left only this brass container as proof. Anger rose fast and hot. I swept my arm across the table, sending the urn clattering to the floor, where it rang hollow against the tile. The sound echoed through the quiet kitchen like a mocking bell. How many nights had I sat in this same room, staring at that urn, convinced it held Nicholas? How many times had I told Brianna stories about her father while the container on the mantel contained nothing but kitchen scraps? I stood up and paced the length of the kitchen, my breath coming short. Every January transfer, every polite thank you message, every vague update about Brianna now looked different. Courtney had never invited me inside the house for more than a few minutes. She had never sent school photos or report cards. The man named Justin Hayes appeared in my memory again. The easy way he touched her arm, the frequency of their meetings. The pieces slid together with a sickening click. I picked up the empty urn from the floor and turned it over in my hands. The brass felt cold and ordinary, now no longer sacred. 4 years of grief, 4 years of sending money I thought was keeping my family together, 4 years of believing I was doing what any father would do. All of it built on a lie sitting right here on my kitchen table. The rage did not fade. It sharpened into something colder, a deep, steady suspicion that reached back through every conversation, every silence, every assumption I had made since the day the police knocked on my door. Nothing about the last 4 years felt solid anymore. The store, the house, the routine I had clung to, all of it rested on a foundation that had just crumbled in my hands. I left the coffee grounds and cinnamon scattered across the table and walked to the living room window. Outside, the street lay dark and quiet. I stood there for a long time, the brass urn still gripped tightly in one hand, while the weight of what I had just discovered settled fully into my chest. That same night, after the discovery on the kitchen table, I knew I could not handle this alone. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through old contacts until I found the number for Scott Adams. We had been friends for nearly 40 years, ever since our kids played on the same little league team. Scott spent 30 years as a detective with the county sheriff's office before retiring. If anyone could help me sort through what I had just found, it was him. I sent a short message asking if he could meet me at the store the next morning. His reply came back within minutes. He would be there at 9. I barely slept that night. The brass urn sat on the counter where I had left it, the scattered coffee grounds still visible under the light. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the coarse brown powder and smelled the sharp mix of coffee and cinnamon. The next morning, I opened Parker Family Market at the usual time but kept the front door locked after the first rush. At 9 sharp, Scott pulled up in his old grey sedan. He walked in carrying a small notebook, the same kind he used to carry on the job. His hair had gone fully grey, but his posture remained straight and alert. We sat on 2 stools behind the counter. I did not waste time on small talk. I told him about Brianna's whisper in the park, the weeks of watching Courtney meet the same man, and finally the moment I opened the urn. Scott listened without interrupting, his pen moving steadily across the page as I described the coffee grounds and cinnamon. When I finished, he set the pen down and looked at me for a long moment. "This is not something you imagine," he said. "4 years of payments, a closed casket, and now this. We need to treat it like a case." He asked for every detail I could remember about the supposed accident, the funeral home, and Courtney's behavior since then. I showed him the notebook where I had recorded the times and places I saw her with Justin Hayes. Scott flipped through the pages, nodding occasionally. "I still have some equipment from the old days," he said. "Nothing fancy, but enough for basic surveillance. We can start by setting up a couple of cameras near Courtney's house and that warehouse district you mentioned. Legal on public streets. We watch who comes and goes, track patterns, see if Justin Hayes is more than just a friend." I felt a strange mix of relief and guilt. Part of me still wanted to believe there was a simple explanation. Another part knew I had waited too long already. Scott must have seen the hesitation on my face because he leaned forward. "Look, Donald, you called me because something feels wrong. Ignoring it won't protect Brianna. We start small. A few days of watching. If nothing turns up, you can sleep easier. If it does, we'll have facts instead of guesses." We spent the next hour going over logistics. Scott would bring the cameras the following morning. We agreed to park in neutral spots, never on private property, and document everything with timestamps and notes. He warned me the process could take time and that I needed to keep acting normal around Courtney. Before he left, Scott placed a hand on my shoulder. "You're doing the right thing. Kids don't whisper warnings like that unless they're scared. We'll find out what's really going on." I locked the door behind him and stood alone in the quiet store. The shelves looked the same as they had for decades, but the air felt different now. I returned to the kitchen at home later that afternoon and carefully collected the coffee grounds and cinnamon into a plastic container. I did not want to disturb any more evidence than necessary. The next morning, Scott arrived with 2 black duffel bags. We reviewed the plan one more time at the counter while a few early customers browsed the aisles. He showed me the small cameras discreet enough to mount on street signs or utility poles with a clear view of Courtney's driveway and the side entrance of the industrial building where I had once seen Justin's car parked. We drove separately to the first location. Scott handled the technical part, checking angles and testing the feed on his laptop. By midday, we had 2 cameras positioned and recording. He explained how the footage would feed to a secure cloud account he still maintained from his detective days. As we packed up the remaining equipment, Scott looked at me. "This is just the beginning. We watch for a week, maybe 2. In the meantime, keep sending the usual texts to Courtney. Act like nothing has changed. The less she suspects, the more we'll see. I nodded, though my chest felt tight. Driving back to the store, I passed the elementary school where Brianna would soon finish her day. The thought of her going home to a house filled with secrets made the decision feel final. Scott had given me a way forward, and for the first time since opening the urn, I no longer felt completely alone with the truth I had uncovered. The following week, Scott and I settled into a careful routine of surveillance. We met each morning at the store before opening hours to review the previous day's footage and plan the next moves. Scott brought additional memory cards and a second laptop so we could work without drawing attention from customers. We focused first on Courtney's house on Maple Street. Scott positioned one camera on a utility pole across the street with a clear view of the driveway and front door. Another smaller unit covered the side entrance where visitors often parked. From our spot 2 blocks away, we watched the feed in real time on Scott's encrypted connection. Courtney left for work most mornings around 8 and returned in the late afternoon to pick up Brianna from after-school care. The pattern seemed ordinary at first until we noticed Justin Hayes arriving shortly after her on 4 separate evenings. He never stayed the night when Brianna was home, but on 2 occasions when Brianna spent the weekend with a friend, Justin's car remained parked in the driveway until well after midnight. Through the telephoto lens, we saw them carrying grocery bags inside together and later sitting on the back patio with drinks. Their movements looked comfortable, familiar, like people who shared more than casual conversation. Scott noted the dates and times while I sat in the passenger seat feeling my stomach tighten with each new entry. We expanded our watch to the industrial area on the east side of Grand Rapids. A large warehouse complex sat behind a chain-link fence building, 447 marked with faded numbers above a side door. Scott had traced the lease to a holding company with no obvious connection to Courtney. We parked behind a row of delivery trucks and trained a long lens camera on the entrance. Justin Hayes arrived there twice during the week, each time carrying a small duffel bag. He stayed inside for 40 to 50 minutes before leaving again. One afternoon, we followed Courtney's silver sedan after she left work early. She drove straight to the warehouse, used a key on the side door, and disappeared inside. Justin arrived 20 minutes later. They remained together for nearly 2 hours. When they finally emerged, Courtney carried a thick envelope while Justin locked the door behind them. They spoke briefly in the parking lot before driving off in separate cars. Scott began digging deeper into the financial side. Using public records and contacts he still maintained, he pulled bank statements and transfer histories. He showed me screenshots on his laptop. The $100,000 payments I had wired every January appeared clearly routed through Courtney's primary account before moving in smaller increments to other holdings. One trail led to an offshore account registered under a company name that matched the warehouse lease. Deposits matched the exact amounts I had sent minus small fees. Additional withdrawals appeared regularly for travel restaurant charges and luxury items far beyond what a single mother working a modest office job could afford. Scott printed copies of the statements and highlighted the dates. "This is not random spending," he said. "The money flows in from your transfers and moves out to accounts tied to Justin Hayes. They're living off it together." We continued the surveillance for another full week. The cameras captured Justin Hayes staying overnight at Courtney's house on nights when Brianna was away. They captured joint shopping trips where Courtney paid with a card linked to the offshore funds. Scott compiled A timeline showing how the large January payments consistently preceded new purchases and trips. One receipt showed first-class tickets to Florida, booked 2 days after my last transfer. The evidence stacked higher each day. Scott created a shared folder on his secure drive where he stored video clips, timestamped photos, and the growing financial spreadsheet. I watched the footage in silence during our morning meetings, the images confirming what the urn had already suggested. Courtney and Justin were not simply dating, they shared a life funded by the money I believed was supporting my granddaughter. By the end of the second week, Scott closed his notebook and looked at me across the counter of the store. We have enough to see the pattern clearly. They're using the warehouse as a secondary location, probably for storing documents or extra cash. The financial trail ties directly back to your transfers. This is deliberate. I noted the weight of the collected evidence pressing heavier than the brass urn ever had. The routine I had trusted for 4 years now lay exposed as something far darker than simple grief or poor communication. Scott and I had only begun to peel back the surface, but what we found beneath it already changed everything I thought I knew about the last 4 years. The third week of surveillance brought the moment that shattered everything I thought I knew. Scott arrived at the store earlier than usual, carrying his laptop under one arm. He set it on the counter without a word and opened a new video file. The footage came from a public traffic camera near the warehouse district, grainy but clear enough for identification. "Watch this," he said quietly. The timestamp showed late afternoon 2 days earlier. A figure walked along the sidewalk toward building 447. The person wore a dark hoodie and kept their head down, but when they passed under the camera, the angle caught their face for several seconds. Scott paused the video and zoomed in. My breath caught. The man on the screen had the same jawline as Nicholas, the same slight tilt of the head when he walked. Even with 4 years of aging and shorter hair, the features were unmistakable. I leaned closer until my nose nearly touched the screen. Scott ran the still frame through a basic facial recognition tool he still had access to. The match came back at 94% against Nicholas's old driver's license photo. I sat frozen on the stool while the store's morning sounds faded into the background. My son was alive. The boy I had buried, the young man whose urn I had kept on the mantle, the father whose daughter I had been supporting with $100,000 every year. He was walking into that warehouse on his own 2 feet. The first wave that hit me was pure relief, sharp and overwhelming. Nicholas had survived. He was breathing, moving, existing somewhere in the same city. For one brief second, I imagined running to the warehouse, pulling him into a hug, telling him everything would be all right now that we had found each other. Then the second wave crashed in a deep, crushing pain mixed with rage. 4 years. 4 years of mourning, 4 years of sending money I believed was helping his child. 4 years of watching Courtney accept those transfers with short, emotionless replies. 4 years of Brianna growing up without her father while I stared at the brass container filled with coffee grounds and cinnamon. The lie had not just stolen my son from me. It had stolen his life from Brianna and turned my grief into fuel for someone else's comfort. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall in the middle of the store. Scott stayed quiet, giving me time to process. When I finally spoke, my voice sounded raw. "How is this possible? They showed me dental records. They handed me that urn. Courtney stood right beside me at the service. Scott nodded slowly. That's what we need to find out. The camera only proves he's alive and entering that building. We don't know yet if he's there willingly or under duress. But the financial trail we already collected that points to Courtney and Justin using your money to maintain this setup. I replayed the short clip 3 more times. Each viewing deepened the ache in my chest. Nicholas looked thinner than I remembered, his shoulders slightly hunched as if carrying weight far heavier than the duffel bag in his hand. The joy of seeing him alive fought constantly against the fury of realizing how completely I had been deceived. We spent the rest of the morning going over every frame Scott could pull from nearby cameras. Nicholas appeared on 2 more public feeds entering and leaving the warehouse area. He never drove himself. Someone always dropped him off or picked him up a block away, usually in a vehicle registered to the same holding company that leased the building. The emotional storm inside me refused to settle. One moment I wanted to laugh from pure relief that my son had not burned to death on that highway. The next moment, the anger returned so strongly I had to grip the edge of the counter to keep my hands steady. 4 years of January transfers totaled $400,000. $400,000 funneled into a lie that kept Nicholas hidden and Brianna fatherless, while Courtney and Justin lived comfortably. Scott closed the laptop and looked at me directly. This changes the priority. We need to confirm his situation before we make any moves. If he's being held against his will, rushing in could put him in danger. If he's part of it, he let the sentence hang unfinished. I shook my head. He wouldn't do that to Brianna. Not willingly. Even as I said the words, doubt flickered at the edges of my mind. 4 years was a long time. People could break under pressure. But the Nicholas I raised would never abandon his daughter for money. The conflict tore at me, joy and suspicion, hope and betrayal, all tangled together so tightly I could barely breathe. Scott stood and gathered his things. I'll pull more footage from the surrounding blocks and cross-reference with the financial records. We keep watching the warehouse. In the meantime, you stay calm around Courtney. The last thing we need is her suspecting we know anything. He left me alone in the store with the image of my living son burned into my memory. Customers came and went, but I moved through the morning on autopilot, ringing up purchases and making small talk while my mind stayed fixed on that grainy footage. The relief of knowing Nicholas was alive, warred constantly with the devastating realization that someone close to us had stolen 4 years of his life and $400,000 of mine. By the time I locked the door for lunch, I had replayed the clip in my head so many times the pixels felt imprinted behind my eyelids. My son was alive. And the truth of what had been done to him and to all of us was only beginning to surface. 2 nights later, Scott and I decided it was time to move. We waited until after dark, parked several blocks away, and approached the warehouse on foot, using the shadows along the fence line. The side door we had watched so many times was unlocked just as the cameras had shown. Scott went first, moving quietly with the confidence of decades on the job. I followed close behind, heart hammering against my ribs. The interior was colder and larger than I expected. High ceilings disappeared into darkness, metal shelves lined with dusty crates stretched into the distance. In the far back corner, someone had created a makeshift living space, a narrow bed with thin blankets, a small table holding a hot plate and instant coffee packets, clothes hanging on a wire between 2 posts. Photos of Brianna were taped to the concrete wall above the bed. every school picture I had ever sent Courtney over the years. A single battery lantern cast a weak yellow glow. Nicholas sat on the edge of the bed staring at those pictures. When the door creaked, he looked up sharply. 4 years had changed him. He was thinner, his face gaunt, eyes hollow with exhaustion. But it was unmistakably my son. Dad. His voice cracked on the single word. I crossed the space in 3 strides and pulled him into my arms. He stiffened at first, then collapsed against me, shoulders shaking. Scott stayed near the door, giving us the moment while keeping watch. We sat on the cold floor while Nicholas spoke in a low, broken voice. He told us how it started 4 years ago. Courtney and Justin had planned everything. They staged the accident on the highway, used a stolen vehicle and theatrical effects to make it look real. Justin had a contact who provided unidentified remains for the dental records and the closed casket. Courtney stood beside me at the funeral, knowing the urn contained nothing but coffee grounds and cinnamon. After the service, they brought Nicholas to this warehouse. They told him if he ever tried to leave or contact anyone, they would make sure Brianna paid the price. They showed him fake documents, suggesting he would be charged with insurance fraud and child abandonment if he surfaced. Every few months, they reminded him of new threats, fabricated police reports, supposed witnesses ready to testify against him. They controlled his food, his clothes, even the photos of Brianna they allowed him to see. Nicholas had begged to speak to Brianna just once. Courtney refused, saying it was safer for everyone if he stayed dead. Justin handled the money side. My $100,000 transfers arrived like clockwork and disappeared into accounts they both accessed. They used the funds for trips, new furniture, even a vacation while Nicholas sat in this concrete box counting the days. He spoke without anger at first, only exhaustion. Then the shame surfaced. He blamed himself for not fighting harder, for believing their threats about Brianna. 4 years of isolation had worn him down until hope felt dangerous. The only thing that kept him going was the wall of photos and the faint belief that one day someone might notice something wrong. Scott asked careful questions about daily routines, who visited, whether Nicholas had ever been allowed outside the warehouse. Nicholas answered steadily, describing how Courtney brought supplies once or twice a week, and how Justin sometimes stayed to remind him of the consequences if he tried to escape. I listened with my fists clenched so tightly my knuckles ached. Every word painted a clearer picture of the betrayal. The woman I had trusted with my granddaughter had helped orchestrate this prison. The man I had never met had profited from my grief for $400,000. They had taken my son's freedom, my granddaughter's father, and my own peace of mind, all while smiling through short thank you texts. Nicholas finally looked directly at me. I never wanted this. I thought about running so many times, but they always brought up Brianna. They said they would make sure she never knew the truth, and that any attempt to contact you would end with me in prison and her taken away. Scott placed a hand on Nicholas's shoulder. You're not alone anymore. We have evidence from the cameras and the financial records. We're building a plan to get you out safely and make them answer for what they did. The 3 of us sat in the dim light while Nicholas continued filling in gaps. The exact dates of major transfers. The arguments he overheard between Courtney and Justin about spending the money too quickly. The nights he listened to them laugh on speakerphone while planning weekend getaways. By the time we prepared to leave the warehouse, my emotions had settled into a cold, focused determination. The joy of finding Nicholas alive still burned, but it was now wrapped tightly around a resolve I had never felt before. 4 years of lies had ended tonight. The next steps would bring the truth into the light, no matter how painful the consequences. We slipped out the same side door and disappeared into the night, leaving Nicholas with a promise that we would return soon with a clear way forward. The morning after our visit to the warehouse, I called Shannon Reed. She was a family law attorney Scott had recommended years ago when a neighbor needed help with custody issues. Shannon answered on the second ring and agreed to meet us at the store that afternoon. By 3 o'clock, she walked through the door carrying a slim leather briefcase, her dark hair pulled back neatly, and her expression calm but focused. We closed the front door and turned the sign to "Back in 30 minutes." The four of us, Scott, Shannon, Nicholas, and I, sat around the small table in the back office. Nicholas kept his hood up at first, still uneasy about being seen, but he lowered it once the door was locked. Shannon listened without interrupting, while Scott laid out the surveillance footage, the financial records, and the details from the night before. When Nicholas finished describing the 4 years inside the warehouse, Shannon leaned forward, her voice steady and professional. "This is false imprisonment combined with fraud on a massive scale. We have strong evidence already, but a recorded confession from Courtney and Justin would make the case airtight. We need them to admit what they did on tape." She outlined the plan clearly. Nicholas would wear a small recording device under his clothing and return to the warehouse at the usual time. Courtney delivered supplies. He would confront both of them together, guiding the conversation toward the staged accident, the threats, and the money. Shannon emphasized that Nicholas must stay calm and let them talk as much as possible. The more they explained and justified their actions, the stronger the recording would be in court. Scott added the safety measures. He would position himself and two trusted contacts nearby in unmarked vehicles. Shannon had already spoken quietly with a detective she worked with regularly. Officers would be on standby a few blocks away, ready to move the moment Nicholas used a safe word. We chose the word school because it sounded natural if Nicholas mentioned Brianna's school activities. We spent the next 2 hours rehearsing the conversation. Shannon wrote key questions on a notepad for Nicholas to memorize, questions that would lead Courtney and Justin to describe the fake accident, the threats against Brianna, and how they spent the $400,000. Nicholas practiced speaking in a steady voice, repeating the lines until they felt natural rather than scripted. Scott showed him the tiny microphone that would clip inside his collar and tested the signal on his laptop. Shannon reviewed the legal side. "Once we have the recording, we move immediately. I'll prepare the emergency motion for temporary custody of Brianna. With the evidence of false imprisonment and fraud, the court will likely grant you full temporary custody right away. We'll also freeze any accounts tied to the money trail." Nicholas asked the hardest question. "What if they panic and try something when I confront them?" Scott answered first. "That's why we have people close. The second you say the safe word, or if anything sounds physical, we come in. You won't be alone for more than 30 seconds. We set the time for the following evening at 7 o'clock, when Courtney usually brought supplies and Justin often joined her. Shannon made sure Nicholas understood every step and the risk involved. She reminded him that he was no longer powerless and that the law would protect him once the truth came out. By the time we finished, the sun had dropped below the rooftops outside the store. Nicholas looked exhausted but determined. Shannon shook his hand and told him she would handle the legal paperwork starting first thing tomorrow. Scott drove Nicholas back to a safe location we had arranged for the night while I stayed behind to lock up the store. The plan felt solid, yet my mind kept returning to the moment Nicholas would face the two people who had stolen 4 years of his life. The relief of having him back warred with the anger that still burned hot. Shannon's calm professionalism and Scott's careful preparation gave me confidence, but nothing could erase the $400,000 or the nights Brianna had spent without her father. I turned off the lights and stood in the dark store for a long minute. Tomorrow evening would either end the nightmare or bring new dangers. Either way, the waiting was almost over. The next evening arrived with a heavy stillness in the air. Nicholas returned to the warehouse alone at 7 o'clock, the small microphone clipped securely inside his collar. Scott and I waited in a car 2 blocks away, listening through the live feed along with Shannon on a conference line. The detectives' team sat ready in unmarked vehicles nearby. Inside the warehouse, the lantern cast its familiar weak light. Courtney arrived first, carrying a grocery bag. Justin followed a few minutes later. Nicholas waited on the edge of the bed until both stood in front of him. His voice came through the feed, calm but firm. I know everything. The accident was fake. The urn was coffee and cinnamon. You kept me here for 4 years while you spent my father's money. Courtney froze. Justin took a half step back, eyes narrowing. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Courtney laughed, a short, nervous sound. What are you talking about? You're confused. We saved you. Nicholas stayed seated, his tone even. Saved me. You staged the crash. You used someone else's remains. You told me Brianna would suffer if I ever left. Tell me the truth. I want to hear you say it. Justin glanced at Courtney, then shrugged. Fine. You want the truth. Yeah, we planned it. The car, the fire, the dental records, all of it. Your father was sending $100,000 every year like clockwork. We needed that money. You were in the way. Courtney's voice grew sharper. It was easy. You were always so trusting. We told you the police would arrest you for fraud. We showed you fake reports. You believed every word because you were scared. Nicholas kept them talking. And the money, $400,000. Where did it go? Justin smirked. Trips, nice dinners, rent on a better place, investments. We lived while you sat in this hole. Your father never questioned anything. He just kept wiring the cash. Courtney added, her tone cold now. We even used some of it for Brianna's clothes and school stuff so it looked legitimate. But mostly it was ours. You were dead, remember, dead men don't need money. The recording captured every word, clearly the admission of the staged accident, the threats, the deliberate 4-year imprisonment, the exact amounts stolen. Nicholas guided them through more details, the dates of major transfers, the offshore accounts, the nights they celebrated while he counted days on the concrete floor. Then the tone shifted. Justin stepped closer, voice dropping low. You think you're smart recording this. If you try to use it, we'll make sure Brianna never sees either of you again. We still have contacts. One phone call and your life ends for real this time. Courtney's face hardened. You've been quiet for 4 years. Stay quiet, or we'll finish what we started on that highway. Nicholas stayed perfectly still, letting their threats hang in the air, the microphone catching every syllable. The moment the threats left their mouths, Scott gave the signal, go. Doors opened simultaneously. Officers in tactical vests moved in fast and silent from multiple directions. The warehouse side door burst open with a loud crack. Flashlights cut through the dim space as commands rang out. Police, hands where we can see them. Courtney and Justin spun toward the noise. Justin lunged for the back exit, but two officers cut him off and slammed him against the concrete wall. Handcuffs clicked shut behind his back. Courtney stood frozen, grocery bags still in her hands, until an officer gently but firmly took her wrists and secured them. Detectives moved quickly through the makeshift living area, photographing the bed, the wall of Brianna's photos, the hot plate, and the scattered supplies. They collected the microphone from Nicholas, bagging it as evidence along with any documents and electronics they found in the corner. I pushed through the officers and reached Nicholas. For the first time in 4 years, I pulled my son into a real hug. He held on tightly, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Neither of us spoke. The years of separation, the lies, the stolen time, everything poured out in that single embrace while chaos moved around us. Shannon arrived minutes later with additional paperwork. She coordinated with the lead detective, ensuring the chain of custody for the recording and financial documents remained intact. Officers carried boxes of papers and hard drives out to the waiting vehicles. Courtney kept repeating that it was all a misunderstanding, that Nicholas had asked to disappear. Justin stayed silent, eyes fixed on the floor as they led him outside. The recording played clearly through a detective speaker, their own voices confessing every detail. The officers exchanged glances at the call admissions. Nicholas and I stood together near the warehouse entrance while the scene was secured. For the first time since the supposed accident, I saw my son under open sky without fear in his eyes. The relief was overwhelming, yet the anger at what had been taken from him still burned steadily. The detective in charge approached us. "We have enough here to hold them tonight. The recording is strong. Combined with the financial evidence and the physical setup, we're looking at multiple felony counts, fraud, false imprisonment, conspiracy, identity, theft. They won't be walking out anytime soon." Shannon nodded. "I'll file the emergency custody motion for Brianna first thing tomorrow. With this evidence, the court will grant temporary sole custody to Mr. Parker immediately." As the last patrol car pulled away with Courtney and Justin in the back seats, the warehouse fell quiet again. Nicholas looked at the empty space where the bed had been, then turned to me. "It's really over." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's over. You're coming home." We walked out together into the cool Michigan night. The 4 years of deception had finally cracked open under the weight of truth and steel handcuffs. Brianna would soon be safe, and the people who had stolen so much would finally face real consequences. 3 months passed before the case reached federal court in downtown Grand Rapids. The courtroom was a large formal space with high ceilings and heavy wooden benches. I sat in the front row beside Nicholas, my hand resting on his shoulder. Brianna stayed home with a trusted neighbor. She was too young to sit through what was coming. Courtney and Justin entered in orange jumpsuits, wrists cuffed, flanked by marshals. They avoided looking in our direction. Shannon Reed sat at the prosecution table as co-counsel, having worked closely with the federal prosecutors on the financial evidence. The judge called the session to order. The charges were read clearly: wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, false imprisonment, identity theft, and money laundering. The prosecutor laid out the case methodically. He played portions of the recorded confrontation from the warehouse. Courtney's and Justin's own voices filled the courtroom as they admitted staging the accident using unidentified remains, keeping Nicholas locked away for 4 years. and spending the $400,000 I had sent. Financial experts testified next tracing every transfer from my account through Courtney's and into offshore holdings. They showed receipts for luxury trips, new vehicles, and rent on a larger apartment, all funded by the money meant for Brianna. Warehouse photos and surveillance stills were entered as evidence, along with the brass urn and the coffee grounds it had contained. Nicholas took the stand on the third day. His voice stayed steady as he described the night of the staged accident, the threats about Brianna, and the long years inside the warehouse. He spoke about the isolation, the fear, and the constant reminders that any attempt to escape would destroy his daughter's life. The courtroom remained silent except for the occasional sound of a pen scratching on paper. Courtney's defense tried to paint Nicholas as a willing participant who had chosen to disappear. Justin's attorney claimed it was all a misunderstanding between consenting adults. Both arguments collapsed when the recording played again and when Shannon cross-examined them on the financial records. The jury watched the faces of the defendants as their own words came back to them. On the final day, the jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood and delivered the verdict guilty on all counts for both defendants. Sentencing came 6 weeks later in the same courtroom. The judge spoke directly to Courtney and Justin before delivering the punishment. He called their actions calculated, cruel, and deeply harmful to an entire family. For Courtney Parker, the sentence was 15 years in federal prison. For Justin Hayes, it was 12 years. Both lost all parental rights to Brianna permanently. The court ordered full restitution of $400,000 to me plus additional damages for emotional harm and false imprisonment. Courtney sat motionless as the sentence was read. Justin stared straight ahead, jaw tight. Marshals led them away through a side door. Neither looked back. Outside the courthouse, Nicholas and I stood on the steps in the cold Michigan air. Shannon joined us, briefcase in hand. "The custody order is already signed," she said. "Brianna is yours permanently. Donald, no visitation, no contact. The restitution process will take time, but the judgment is final." I felt no sense of victory, only a quiet finality. 4 years of lies had ended in steel bars and a courtroom verdict. The money mattered less than the years stolen from my son and granddaughter. Nicholas would need time to heal. Brianna would need patience and stability. I would give them both. We drove home together in silence, the weight of the morning settling into something steadier. The chapter of deception was closed. What remained now was the slow, deliberate work of rebuilding what had been broken. The court issued its final custody order 2 weeks after sentencing. The judge granted me permanent legal and physical custody of Brianna with no visitation rights or contact allowed for Courtney. The decision was swift and unequivocal. Shannon handed me the papers in her office, and for the first time in months, I felt the weight on my chest begin to lift. I drove straight to the house on Maple Street with the official documents. Courtney was no longer there. She had already been moved to federal custody. A court-appointed guardian helped me collect Brianna's belongings. The little girl stood quietly by the door holding her favorite stuffed bear, eyes wide as she watched me pack her clothes and school books. She did not ask about her mother. She simply took my hand when I offered it and walked out of the house without looking back. From that day forward, I cut every possible tie with Courtney. Her name was removed from all school and medical records. Any mail or messages connected to her were returned unopened. Nicholas and I made a quiet agreement. Her chapter in our lives was closed forever. There would be no letters, no phone calls, no attempts at reconciliation. What she and Justin had done could not be forgiven or explained away. The betrayal ran too deep, and the years they had stolen could never be returned. Brianna moved into my house the same week. We turned the spare bedroom into her own space with new bedding and shelves for her books. She started at the local elementary school near the store, and every afternoon she rode the bus straight to Parker Family Market. I kept a small chair behind the counter so she could sit and do homework while I helped customers. The regulars quickly adopted her. Mrs. Henderson brought cookies on Tuesdays, and Mr. Wallace taught her how to count change at the register. Life settled into a new rhythm in our quiet suburb of Grand Rapids. I opened the store at 6 as always, but now Brianna helps stock the lower shelves with cereal and snacks after school. She learned to greet customers by name and proudly rang up small purchases on the old register. Nicholas lived with us too slowly, rebuilding his strength and confidence. He took over some of the heavier lifting at the market and began speaking with the counselor twice a week. The three of us ate dinner together every evening. At the kitchen table, simple meals of pasta or grilled chicken, the kind of ordinary moments that had been missing for 4 years. There were difficult days. Brianna sometimes woke up crying from nightmares she could not explain. Nicholas would sit quietly in the living room, staring at old photos, the anger still visible in his eyes. On those nights, I reminded myself that healing was not linear and that silence about Courtney was the kindest choice we could make. We never spoke her name in the house. We never wondered aloud what she might be thinking in prison. The decision to cut her out completely brought a strange kind of peace. There would be no false hope, no painful visits, no lingering questions. She had made her choices and we had made ours. The store itself felt brighter with Brianna's laughter echoing down the aisles. She organized the candy section by color and helped me create a small reading corner near the front window. Customers commented on how quickly she had grown comfortable, how naturally she belonged there. I watched her ring up her first solo sale with a proud smile and realized this was the life I had been fighting to protect all along. Evenings were quiet but full. We walked to the park on weekends, the same bench where Brianna had first whispered her warning, now a place of simple conversations about school and favorite books. Nicholas joined us when he felt ready, the three of us sitting together under the old oak tree. No one mentioned the past. We focused instead on the small steady steps forward, a good report card, a new recipe tried at dinner, the first time Brianna rode her bike without training wheels. There was no forgiveness in our home, and we did not pretend otherwise. Courtney and Justin had chosen greed and cruelty over family. That choice carried permanent consequences. We accepted the reality without bitterness, choosing instead to build something stronger in its place. The money from restitution would come slowly, but it mattered far less than the daily sight of Brianna laughing behind the counter or Nicholas helping a customer reach the top shelf. Our new life in Grand Rapids was not perfect, but it was honest and it was ours. The Parker Family Market continued its quiet work of serving the neighborhood, now with two more hands and three generations, learning to stand together again without looking back. Looking back now, 4 years after the night we found Nicholas in that warehouse, the truth feels both heavy and freeing. I sit on the same park bench where Brianna first whispered her warning, watching her chase her younger cousins across the grass, while Nicholas laughs beside me. The Parker Family Market still stands on the corner of Maple and Chestnut, but the lights stay on a little longer these days, and the shelves hold new smiles along with the usual bread and milk. Those 4 years of deception taught me lessons I never wanted to learn. I believed I was doing the right thing by sending $100,000 every January. I trusted family, trusted silence, trusted the closed casket and the brass urn on the mantle. What I received in return was a carefully built lie that stole my son's freedom, my granddaughter's father, and countless nights of peace from all of us. The money was never just money. It was time, trust, and love turned into someone else's comfort. The courtroom delivered justice, not revenge. 15 years for Courtney and 12 years for Justine were not acts of anger, but the necessary consequence of choices they made again and again. They lost parental rights forever. They owe $400,000 in restitution. The law did its job without me needing to raise a hand in vengeance. That distinction matters. Revenge would have left me hollow and bitter. Truth and legal justice gave us a clean ending and the chance to rebuild without carrying their shadow. I no longer keep the brass urn. It sits in storage, a reminder rather than a sacred object. The coffee grounds and cinnamon are gone, but the memory of opening that lid still sharpens my thinking. Never again will I accept silence as normal when a child looks afraid. Never again will I send large sums without asking harder questions. Grief can blind us, but love demands clarity. Our days now are ordinary in the best way. Brianna helps at the store after school, carefully arranging the candy by color and proudly ringing up small purchases. Nicholas works beside me, his strength returning slowly, his laughter coming more easily each month. We eat dinner together every evening, talk about school projects and weekend plans, and let the quiet moments fill the spaces where pain used to live. There are still hard nights when old memories surface, but we face them together instead of alone. The most important lesson I carry forward is this: family is not defined by blood alone, but by the daily choice to protect and cherish one another. Truth matters more than comfort. Justice, when pursued through proper channels, brings real peace. Holding on to anger only chains you to the people who hurt you. Letting the law and time do their work sets you free. To anyone listening who might be carrying a similar weight, a family secret, a betrayal hidden behind polite smiles, a child who seems afraid but cannot yet explain why, I offer this simple advice: ask the hard questions. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong. Do not let grief or love make you blind to danger. Seek help from those who know how to find facts. And when the truth finally surfaces, let the system handle the consequences. Your job is to protect what remains and to build something stronger on the other side. The sun is setting over the park now, painting the sky in soft oranges and purples. Brianna runs back to us, cheeks flushed, holding up a bright red leaf she found. Nicola smiles and ruffles her hair. I watch them both and feel a quiet gratitude that outweighs every painful year we lost. This story does not end with dramatic revenge or tearful forgiveness. It ends with 3 generations choosing truth over lies, justice over vengeance, and family over fear. That choice is enough. If this story stayed with you, drop a comment below and tell me one lesson you are taking away. Share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you want more stories about real family truths and the courage it takes to face them, make sure you are subscribed so you never miss what comes next. Thank you for staying until the end. Your time and attention mean more than you know.